I'll start with a good morning to our viewers, our trustees from across the province, welcoming you to an interview session that's been organized by our MSBA folks, and thank them for the work that they've done preparing us for a little bit of a conversation this morning that we'll have with a panel from diverse groups from across the province. And I'll introduce myself firstly. I'm Todd Cuddington. I'm the Superintendent, Secretary, Treasurer of the Portage Prairie School Division, and I'm honored to have been chosen to act as a moderator this morning. And it's my pleasure to introduce the first person that is part of our panel as someone who's not unfamiliar to people in the education world. Dr. Lesley Eblie Trudel is going to be with us, giving her thoughts and opinions and feedback on some questions that we'll pose to her. Dr. Trudel has been a successful member of public education in Manitoba, certainly a leader for over 30 years. She is a former assistant superintendent of schools, and Lesley is now an associate dean and assistant professor in the Faculty of Education at the University of Winnipeg. She's a kind and collaborative leader with keen interest in organizational learning and systematic change as it pertains to diverse and inclusive communities. And we know her research well and appreciate the work that she does in education and helping to lead in this province. So welcome, Lesley, and thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much, Todd. And thanks, first of all, to MSBA for asking me to be part of the panel presentation today in order to address some very thought-provoking questions that MSBA has provided. Thank you.
Well, we welcome you. Thank you. And thanks for giving your time. It's much appreciated. Brie Villeneuve is a grade 12 student, where they lead the Social Justice Club along with participating in many other activities. Villeneuve spends a lot of their time working towards creating positive change in their community and abroad, including educating people, supporting local nonprofits, and protesting when needed actions are failed to be accomplished. Most recently, Villeneuve has been working with a small group of students in organizing the Manitoba Students for COVID Safety.
Thank you so much for having me.
Luanne Karn is the founding member of the parent advocacy group, Parents for Public Education Manitoba. She is the mother of a 10-year-old daughter and has been a teacher for over 20 years. As a community activist, Luanne helped to mobilize parents against Bill 64 during the past school year and continues to advocate for a well-funded, safe, and equitable public education for all Manitobans, families in Manitoba. So welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Todd, and thank you to the members of the Manitoba School Boards Association for inviting me to speak today.
So this morning, what we would like to begin our conversation around is some research and a recent poll that was conducted by Probe Research just this past December 2021. That asked a representative sample of Manitobans what they believe would improve public schools in our province. And in rank order, this is what they have said. And I think we'll put up a slide here that indicates some of the feedback that was received. And Probe asked Manitobans most likely to say improving education would start with teacher salaries and benefits. And then it ranks them starting with 23% of respondents and down to the bottom of the graph there that you see, or the chart that says 11% who are uncertain. And so I guess that brings us to our first question, Dr. Trudel, is what do you think these priorities say, and really what do you find that do they resonate with you? And if so, why?
I thought the first question was compelling in terms of what the public believes would improve our schools. And I appreciated the graphic representation that you just spoke to, Todd, of the survey results. And I'm going to address the top 5 in the graph, but I'm going to loop in all of the responses where I can as well, because I believe they're all important to the topic that we're discussing today. So I wanted to clarify before we begin that when we're talking about improving schools, my interpretation is related to improved student achievement. So that's how I'm going to frame my answer to this question. So let's begin with teacher salaries and benefits. And I'm not talking about incentive pay or merit pay here, but I would like to address the topic of negotiated teacher salaries. So early studies on the topic have provided mixed results as to whether increases in teacher salaries will result in improved student achievement. There's a 2019 study, so a later study done by the Organization for Economic Development and Cooperation, the OECD, and it demonstrated a connection between teacher ability and salary, as well as teacher ability and student achievement. But the study did not confirm a connection between teacher salaries and improved student achievement per se. So that's interesting. Nonetheless, the study did demonstrate that student test scores were higher in countries where teachers had more advanced skills. So Canada, of course, is one of those countries, and Manitoba is part of Canada. And we're looking, if we're looking offshore, then as you're likely familiar with, Finland would be another example of this in a foreign context. So we know that their students do very well. So those are my thoughts relating to teacher salaries. In terms of the second aspect of the graph, funding for schools, it's certainly been top of mind right now with the recent announcement by Minister Iwasko. And I believe he talked about $120 million to undertake regular operations, which consists of a base fund of $20 million. And then there's $77 million, which covers financial strains due to COVID, rising costs due to inflation, contractual salary settlement obligations after Bill 28, which is the Public Schools Sustainability Act. And then there's this additional $23 million to offset revenue as a result of the freeze in property taxes. So along with that funding conversation, we can include other aspects of this graph, which are the resources for children, which were next on the response list. And we can probably also include addressing poverty and access to technology. I believe these were suggestions, including another one, which is additional EAs for classrooms. And EAs are certainly a viable resource when they're determined to be appropriate. That being said, regular increases and government portions of funding can assist school divisions in addressing and absorbing costs of additional resources due to social and economic challenges in communities, as well as health and mental health needs. I believe school divisions are being forced, either by design or by context right now, due to the pandemic, to provide remote learning solutions, and this includes additional requirements of internet service provision and devices to connect students. So again, school divisions are being asked to absorb many additional costs. Now, the Minister of Education might argue that Manitoba has one of the highest per pupil costs, but I'd like to put that in perspective. Canada has the second highest child poverty rate amongst peer countries, and Manitoba has the second highest rate of child poverty of all of our provinces and territories, and that is second only to Nunavut. And as a result, I believe it costs more to educate youth in Manitoba than it does in any other jurisdiction in Canada. I'd like to move on to the responsible smaller class sizes. For this element, I'm going to defer to Dr. John Hattie. And Dr. Hattie is a researcher from the University of Melbourne in Australia. And he conducted a meta-analysis of influences that affect student performance. Now, he would tell us that class size arguments are from what he calls the politics of distraction. In essence, what he says is we give greater credit to class size for its impact on student performance than it deserves. The issue is that it possibly has some effect, as any teacher would tell you from anecdotal experience. And the fact that most teachers refer to is a combination of class size and compositional factors. Factors from, let's say, a class with students who are from an economically disadvantaged background, or perhaps a class with students with many additional needs. So where I will leave this is that school division personnel collect a lot of data on class size and composition. And I think it's important that school leaders have the flexibility and the latitude to have input in decision-making where class sizes are concerned. So, something to consider there. The next response that I can address is around changes in curriculum. And I would also like to include the following additional survey items under this item, and that would be update to history curriculum, refocus on basic skills, higher standards, teaching job or life skills, and also STEM curriculum and physical activity requirements, because I believe all of those fit into that topic of curriculum change. I'll start out by saying that there needs to be a regular schedule of curriculum revision. And in some cases in our province, that has occurred. And this needs to happen because there are always world changes, there are shifts in worldview, there's technological advances, there's knowledge advances, and of course, social change in general. I would add that it's likely with curriculum change that students will find greater relevance and increased engagement in school. So I'll leave it there with curriculum change. And I'd like to conclude this question with a response about student mental health and behavior supports, because this is a passion area of mine. I generally refer to this area as social emotional learning, and I would include bullying and classroom management and discipline here as well. The evidence is pretty clear in this area that support for student mental health is crucial. Research identifies that 70% of mental health problems have their onset in childhood and adolescence, which is during the school age years. And an estimated 1.2 million children are affected by mental illness. And Canada's suicide rate is actually third highest in the industrial world. So we know that youth have reported the greatest declines in mental health since the COVID-19 pandemic. From a Manitoba perspective specifically, we have upward of 10,000 children in the care of child and family services, and many of our children have experienced complex trauma. And that context has to be acknowledged when we talk about improving our schools. So yes, mental health supports are very necessary in terms of the foundation for our students to be successful.
Brie, you had a chance to look at some of the research that was conducted by Probe Research in December of 2021. And they asked a representative sample of Manitobans what they believe would improve public education in our province. And in rank order on the graph that was provided, we can see the responses that were given. And so the question that we have this morning is, do these priorities find resonance with you? And if so, why? And if not, what do you feel can also be achieved to improve our schools today?
Yeah, so our group and me especially, we like to think that there's not one choice that will make schools better, but like every single thing on that list needs to be a priority and it needs to be addressed, and it goes hand in hand with improving our education system. Like as great as updating the curricula would be, it doesn't address the fact that many students lack mental health support, or they go to school hungry and need to find some kind of breakfast, and it's usually not a healthy one, which means that their school readiness isn't going to be as well. And some students just simply don't feel safe in school.
When you look at that list, are there things that as a grade 12 student who's looking to graduate this year would like to see on the list that maybe wasn't there?
There wasn't anything really in specific. Personally, though, I think their support towards the disability community in Bill 64 was, well, everything was lacking in Bill 64, but especially that, as someone who is disabled, it would have been nice to see that more people, cared about marginalized communities in schools and wanted them to succeed.
What do you think right now would be top of your list to improve schools today on the educational side?
I think that listening to students is really important, and really anyone in the school community. We are the best to go towards because we're in the building. We see what happens. We're fed the curriculum. Teachers teach it, and we have the best opinions on what's being presented and how the school system operates. If your furnace breaks down, you're not going to call someone in the film industry to help you because they're not specialized in it. So it's important that we make changes to the education system. We go directly to the source and actually listen to them and take it into consideration and work towards a better environment.
Yeah. Are you finding that you've had that opportunity in our system to have a voice?
I think that I do have a voice, yes. If it's being heard is another thing entirely. I'm not sure if the government had listened to us when we told them we don't agree with Bill 64 or not, but there was a lot of outrage to say this is wrong. And so they did take it back, but our concern as a group is that they're just gonna sugarcoat another bill with the same exact intentions.
Right, Luanne, and I know we're curious to get your impression on a recent December 2021 Globe probe research poll that took place, and it asked a representative sample of Manitobans what they believe would improve public education in our province. And in rank order, the graph was produced, and I think that was shared with you. And I'm just wondering, do these priorities resonate with you? And if so, why?
Well, I wanted to say that before I saw the results of that survey that you shared, we had done a similar poll with our own group in January, reaching out through our social media to ask what priorities they felt were important as parents in advance of the preparation for the new budget in Manitoba. And many of the same things came across for our community, as the research probe showed as well. Definitely, stability of funding was number one by so many of our members. And I think that was very high up on the study that you just showed us, right? The results of it. And then the other priorities were decreases in class size, breakfast and lunch programs in schools, addressing poverty in our province, Indigenous reconciliation, and school libraries. Anyhow, these were integrated into the priorities, the 14 that were listed in the probe research study. What I would say as a member of Parents for Public Education about the poll from probe research is that funding and equity underline all of the 14 priorities that they're listed in that study. And both of these priorities, funding and equity, have been under attack by our current provincial government in the form of different pieces of legislation that they put forward recently. So regarding funding, we need to change the narrative when we talk about annual budgets for our public school boards. Public education is an investment. It's not an expense on a line item, on a budget. Our financial commitment to public education has to reflect how much it would cost us to learn, to have so much learning loss and low quality education. When we invest in public education, it increased the value for many future generations in our society. So I agree with the study that funding or public funding for public education is absolutely the most crucial issue at this time in Manitoba. And if you look at all the other priorities that they were asking about, equity is the next issue. So equity is important in providing the same level of education for every child in our community. So the Probe research study talked about resources for children and families, smaller class sizes, reading and writing skills, mental health supports, having classroom aides, and all of these require a stable base of provincial funding. So we do agree with all those priorities, but funding would be number one in order to even begin to accomplish those goals.
Well, thank you for your thoughts and responses to those topic areas that Probe has done their research on. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and just turn to the recent conversation and realities around Bill 64. So certainly for our trustees, it's been front and center for a number of months until it was struck on the order paper most recently. And most still agree that education is constantly changing and being upgraded and renewed. And I'm just wondering, what changes would you like addressed, or what area that has seen change would you like to see the system to continue to build upon?
Well, first, the K12 Review Commission, in its final report on the reform of K12 education, organized its recommendations around 10 imperatives for action. The government, of course, as you mentioned, did not proceed in that direction. And I would like to say that I'm glad that the government took a sober second look at the vast and sweeping changes that it was proposing under Bill 64. But we know that government does not need a bill to make many of the changes that they were proposing to make. And we've seen our provincial government continuing to convene consultation committees and working groups in many areas. And from what I can see, they're planning on still addressing changes, again, in a number of areas. So from my perspective, I would like to see the following items addressed, and I'm going to address them under the 4 pillars that the government proposed in its strategy. So I'll start off with funding. Funding seems to be a really important item, both in the survey and also in what I'm identifying here. And I think it forms the foundation of everything that we do. There needs to be consideration for significant amendments or outright changes to education funding structures in Manitoba, not only in terms of additional dollars to be provided by the government to cover increasing costs incurred by school divisions, and those costs I just mentioned in my last comment, but also in terms of enhancement in the provincial portion of funding in education in general. So provincial portion versus the tax portion. And there's also a need for revision and update to the frame document. So what I'm talking about is the financial reporting and accounting in Manitoba education document. It's important for funding frameworks to be aligned with current pedagogical philosophies and practices. So I ask rhetorically, are the accounting practices that are currently in place in our province right now truly in alignment with what is happening in Manitoba schools? The second area that I would prioritize would be high quality learning outcomes for all students. So that was the second pillar, and I agree. For this, this is an area where regularly scheduled renewal of curriculum is important. And again, I cite reasons for that being knowledge and social change. Any gains achieved in this area will require that poverty and equity issues be addressed first. Otherwise, those high quality outcomes will not come to fruition. In addition, curriculum has to be accessible to all students. Ontario disability rights activist and lawyer David Lepofsky says that trying to access curriculum is like giving a kid a shoehorn and trying to fit their foot into a shoe that was never designed for a foot. And I believe in Manitoba, we've made a cottage industry out of shoe fitters and shoehorns in an attempt to reduce the barriers of curriculum for students in Manitoba schools. Now, if you look at the Accessibility for Manitobans Act, they have developed standards in the area of customer service, employment, communications, the built environment, and transportation. And in Ontario, currently, they're adding a standard, and that's the standard for K-12 education. And they've identified 7 barriers to accessible education. Now, a standard of this nature in Manitoba would go far to provide accessibility and equity to curriculum for all students. Now, I'm not going to get into a further discussion here because it's a fairly expansive topic, but I would definitely recommend that trustees become aware of this work, as I believe that accessibility education and the work that's being done in Ontario will extend to other provinces in the very near future. And I can provide a link to share with the group for further study in this regard. Another area that I would like to see addressed, and this goes along with the 3rd pillar, would be preparation for the future. And realistically, we have no idea what the future is going to hold for our students, nor can we predict what the world is going to be requiring of them in their lifetimes. So I wonder whether a back to the basics approach, literacy skills, job skills, life skills, will those things be enough? I'm not sure. But according to a report entitled The Future of Education and Skills 2030, doesn't seem like that far away now. This report talks about literacy in a variety of contexts, so social, political, medical, economic, and environmental. And literacy in these areas would certainly prepare students to transform their lives and shape their futures. And it would help to create citizens who are knowledgeable to support themselves in gainful employment, citizens that have a balanced life and can enjoy quality of life, citizens that are perceptive to discern between information and disinformation, which is so relevant right now, and citizens that can advocate for a more just and equitable and sustainable world. So that's my vision. That's the vision, right? So that brings us to the area of excellence in teaching and leadership, which is the 4th pillar. And I would add that in order to prepare students for a future world, we have to empower our teachers to use their professional knowledge, skills, and expertise to deliver the curriculum in specific, tailored, accessible ways for each student. So more than ever, when students have acquired their basic skills, and they have to acquire their basic skills first, they should be involved in creating real-world connections, keeping education relevant and engaging. And I believe education may no longer be organized around subject specifics, but maybe more cross-curricular, project-based, or cross-discipline design, so we can align students' curriculum and evolving social requirements. And we're certainly going in that direction already. That's not something entirely new. And all of this will involve professional learning and development for teachers, which is a really high cost for each school division. I remember that. And with school divisions working on similar goals and professional learning needs, I think a provincial framework with professional development and provincially facilitated learning opportunities embedded within the day-to-day work of teachers in school divisions would definitely assist in ushering these emerging trends and evolving curriculum and classroom education forward in the future. So those are some of my thoughts around the 4 pillars and priorities from my perspective.
We know that Bill 64, didn't make it from the order paper. And most still agree that education is constantly changing, being upgraded and renewed. What changes would you like addressed, or what area that has seen change would you like to see our system to continue to build upon?
Yeah, our social justice group is really huge on community and the building of it and support. we'd really like to see in schools more support towards not just students, but educators and staff, mental health supports for everyone, breakfast and lunch programs for honestly everyone. You know, some staff members may not be able to afford that, or they may have to rush out the door and can't eat a healthy meal. More support in like inclusive education and outside of like separate programs, but also in just normal classes, because there's lots of different ways of thinking. We'd like to see schools build together and work together, and everyone be cooperative and work for the best intentions of the student individually, and not as a cluster of just 16-year-olds.
Are you looking to pursue post-secondary education when you're graduating?
I am, yes.
Mhm. And what things that you've experienced in school are you hoping to follow up in your studies?
I'm going in, well, hopefully to neuroscience. And I plan to take that into like kind of studying the behaviors of people, which is really psychology based, and use that knowledge to work towards creating better environments, but also just not in school systems. I like to advocate for my community outside of school as well.
We know from the work that was done in the province, pushing back against Bill 64, that ultimately it was struck from the order paper. And most still agree that education, is still constantly changing and being upgraded and renewed. What changes would you like addressed, or what area that has seen change would you like to see the system continue to build upon?
The other areas that we'd like to prioritize are equity within public education, which I mentioned briefly. For students who are living in poverty, students with disabilities, for the 2S LGBTQ community, we need systemic changes to create a progressive and equitable school system in Manitoba. And learning and teaching must be grounded in that, using an equity lens. Students know and understand that these changes are happening. They're ahead of most adults when we talk about equity. They understand the diversity of our schools, they understand inclusion, but we need that to be really built into the curriculum at all levels. Another important point would be Indigenous reconciliation at this point in Canadian history. So true land acknowledgement, respect for Indigenous languages and knowledge, land-based learning, etc. And then another area that is important to focus on in the future is environmental sustainability. I find it interesting that outdoor education became something we utilized during the pandemic. I saw outdoor play spaces at my daughter's school, lots of opportunities to engage in the outdoor environment. And I hope those continue after the pandemic ends. We also have 20 new schools that are being planned in Manitoba, from what I understand. And so sustainable environmental sensitivity, I hope, is at the forefront for all the educational leaders in even thinking about those schools as we begin to think about their shapes and how they're constructed and how they heat and cool their spaces. I know a school in Ontario became carbon neutral by building solar panels over the parking lot for their school staff. There were so many solar panels, they were able to generate enough energy to become carbon neutral with one simple action. So we hope that those are focuses for the future in terms of education.
Lots to take away there. So I appreciate your thoughts on that, and certainly share a lot of your opinions and definitely the things that we need to consider going forward. I'm going to move to our last. It's our final question, and I think it's a question that many people are asking, people within the education system and the general public. But what do we want from our public schools? And what should be the aim and the mandate that will act as the North Star to really guide the discussions and the decisions of all education partners, including government and the public in the future? So what is it that we want?
Yeah, the North Star. I love it.
Mhm.
I believe the North Star that will guide our conversations in the future is public education itself. And I'm going to defer on this one to a Canadian education activist and director for People for Education. Her name is Annie Kidder. So if you've ever watched the Superman movies, her sister Margot Kidder was in that legacy. Annie lives in Toronto, and she elaborates on this point. And she says that when she's often asked, what is your burning platform? What makes your work necessary or urgent? She says that it feels as though the world itself is burning, literally and figuratively. And she adds that we have increasingly angry forms of populism that are dividing us and threatening our democracies. We have millions of people who are displaced by war and terrorism and oppression and deprivation. Climate change is a global threat that we seem unwilling to buckle down and do something about. And young people are increasingly likely to struggle with mental illness. And if not that, they're reporting high levels of anxiety about the future. And she also mentions that there are ever-growing gaps between rural and urban communities, between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples, and between the privileged and those who are left out. And most worrying of all, she says that we are living in a post-truth era where evidence, facts, science, and even honesty are not things that we can count on any longer. And at this point, we have two choices. We can hide and hope it all goes away, or we can look for places where we can make real change, look upstream. And despite the mess we're in, she says there is hope, and hope lies in public education. And I would agree. And the thing that gave me chills about that statement that she made was that she wrote it in 2018. And that was well before the pandemic and before the events that happened in our country, across the country this past couple of weeks. And so certainly something that caused me to stop and take note, but I believe that public education is the final frontier. I believe that public education is the future.
Well, what do we want from our public schools, do you think, as a society? And what should be the aim or overall mandate that will act as we call the North Star to guide us and to help to guide decision makers and education partners in the government? What do you think that might be?
There's a lot of different ways that we can approach that topic because there's a lot of different things that can be done to make the education system better. I think our main thing is really listening to the community and trying to build off of it. Like I've said, that is the most important thing to us. In our group, we like to listen to each other, hear different viewpoints, work together on creating the best solution. And sometimes that means agreeing on what something shouldn't be instead of what something should be.
Any final thoughts for us today, Brie? You've been really insightful.
I don't think so.
Well, I think on behalf of all of our MSBA members, trustees, and educators in the system, we want to thank you for giving up your time today and talking with us.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay, best of luck with your studies and good luck towards graduation.
Thank you.
Question that we've asked all of our panel members, and I think getting a parent and teacher perspective is important here. But what do you want, or what do you think the public wants of public schools?
Does the public want versus parents or teachers? Well, I think it goes back to the fact that education is an investment into the generations who are going to continue to lead our communities, our province, to move into the workforce, to provide innovative opportunities in terms of our economy. And so we, as a community, they want the highest level possible of investment in order to have that future generation that is confident, respectful of each other, have good citizenship skills, and that they have the critical thinking skills to move into such a different time in history. Public education has always changed. It changed with the Industrial Revolution. It changed with when we ended the segregation based on race or disabilities. And I think we're at a time of change that's significant right now. Our children are learning to learn differently, and they are learning to learn about the world locally, globally, in every way. But through the changes that they've had to go through, I think that they are going to embrace a community or a global community and try to make it safe for everyone and respectful for everyone.
I'm wondering what should be the aim or overall mandate that will act as the North Star to guide discussions and decisions of all education partners, government, and the public in the future?
So I would like to suggest that we have one North Star and then 5 stars in a constellation around it, if that's okay, as a framework. And the North Star that I would use as a parent and as a teacher and as an advocate for safe, equitable communities is the United Nations Convention of the Rights of the Child. So I was looking at Article 28 and 29, and I'm just going to read it for you because I think it could be a North Star for many levels of decisions, planning, and decision-making, something you could return to over and over again to think about, you know, what we're doing in education. Every child has the right to an education. Children's education should help them fully develop their personalities, their talents, and their abilities. It should teach them to understand their own rights and to respect other people's rights, cultures, and differences. It should help them to live peacefully and protect the environment. It's a very simple statement, but I think it kind of helps us get away from sometimes all the minutia about should we be doing this much reading or writing or math literacy, and think about the larger purpose of what we're doing in education. And then I would add for our constellation of 5 stars is what I mentioned earlier, and that is funding, sustainable funding, equity, Indigenous reconciliation, environmental sustainability, and then one last 5th star, which I wouldn't mind ending on, which is a guide to recovering from this pandemic. And I just don't want to leave that out because during the past 2 school years, most elementary students have spent 50 to 100% of their school years in a global pandemic in their elementary school years. Most middle school teachers or students where I teach have spent every year in the pandemic in grades 6, 7, or 8. They will have arrived in middle school during a pandemic and left during pandemic. They will never have experienced middle school outside of a pandemic. And for secondary students, it may be half or all of their high school education that's been affected. So we do need our school divisions to continue to provide the basics to reduce transmission of COVID, but we also need to provide rich psychosocial interventions in our schools in the next coming years. I notice students I work with who are in middle school who have, and my daughter who is in grade 4, they've missed the opportunities to play, socialize with their friends for 3 years, and they are literally behind socially or neurologically, I'm not sure, in developing those skills. So we need to invest in those interventions in the coming days. And then also to evaluate and develop plans for any learning loss and learning recovery plans for students in the coming years. So that would be our North Star, and then our 5 constellations to help us through, to help us in the future, help guide us in the future.
And thank you for your thoughts and perspectives today. I think your summation at the end certainly is going to be something that's going to be food for thought for a number of trustees that are listening today, as we, hopefully are exiting the pandemic and are also, in the midst of or have just recently finished budget preparation. So lots to consider there, and we thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much. I know that not everything can be done with the money we have right now. So by thinking about guiding principles and ideas, hopefully we can do what we can and hope for future investments in public education.
I think that the people on this call and the ones who are watching today from across the province who have dedicated themselves to their roles as trustees and educators would certainly agree with that. And I appreciate the thoughts and the time that you've given us this morning.
What will tomorrow look like? Will it be what you expected? Or something you never could have predicted? Will it be frightening or exciting? Is it the reason you can't sleep at night? Or the reason you get up in the morning? Tomorrow will be all of these things. With Hub, you have a partner today who supports you as you write your tomorrow. And we will protect you when you get there. Because the truth is, tomorrow is a gift. And we want you to be ready for it.